to our panelists to give us some definition of what they see this space being later on. But some quick introductions. So Liam joined us for the last session. Liam's from OpenTable for anyone who's at the demo just now. So bringing a real-world customer implementation perspective. We've got Gary from who's joined us from Scotland, one of the key contributors to the Chocolatey packaging movement, and kind of something that's really driving forward some of the adoption of Windows packaging, which is brilliant. We've got Richard from Redgate, representing some of the database space and some of the great work that's being done to make sure that databases aren't forgotten in this world. And then finally we've got James Betteley from DevOpsGuys, who's kind of passionate about kind of the entire pipeline piece and understanding, how continuous integration as a practice is brought in. And as I'm sure you'll hear, it's not all about tooling. So to set some context, we heard this morning that DevOps in the Windows world is impossible. I guess that's DevOps in a Microsoft space is impossible. And that's a really interesting comment because we see it in action every day. And there's a lot of great companies out there doing some great work in this space. So for me, it's kind of, as we look at what DevOps is as a concept, there's some foundations that have been set. So we heard this morning that Agile is one of those foundations. It's our belief that continuous integration and continuous delivery are possible foundations of that as well. But there's this conflicting argument about whether DevOps is the wide view of the world or whether that view is actually continuous delivery. So I'm going to start kind of at this side of the table. Can you kind of just give us a quick introduction to what you think continuous delivery means in this space, and give us some overview of some of the major concepts you think that are involved in continuous delivery?
Yeah, hello. Continuous delivery for me is definitely a subset of DevOps. It's a practice, it's one of those sort of tangibles that you do, whereas DevOps is more like an organisational culture thing. It's around your sort of team setup, the way you behave, the way you plan your projects, the way you execute. Whereas continuous delivery is an actual action. It's the way you deliver your software. So I'm firmly in the sort of Dave Farley camp when it comes to continuous delivery. It's build your packages once and then deploy them to your successive environments until it's proven that they're not good enough to go to production, or that it's proven that they are good enough to go to production, in which case you have a checkpoint there and you can either then push them out to production or not. So that's the kind of difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So you can be doing continuous delivery and not be doing DevOps. So one of them is definitely a superset of the other. DevOps, on the other hand, I'd argue it would be quite a challenge to really fully embrace the sort of the goals, the ethos of DevOps if you weren't at least doing good continuous integration. Same with Agile. It'd be very hard to say you were as agile as you possibly could be if you weren't doing continuous integration. It's a key cornerstone for me for doing good Agile. So it's about getting that feedback, those short feedback loops. And continuous integration has been around for a long time. And it was all about getting those feedback loops, that feedback from your build system far quicker than it used to be.
Good stuff. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, likewise. Obviously, you can remember that there's a historical pattern to this. We came across Agile with decent test. We had Agile, and we came hand in hand, and everyone, of course, looked around and said, "Well, hang on a second, where are the gaps?" And so, yeah, DevOps is the superset of CI and CD. From my perspective, it is about getting those feedback loops, but also making them meaningful from a business sense. And for obviously my focus is on the database area. So on the one hand, we have lots of complexity in making that releasable package, that releasable artifacts, because we've got problems like where the system boundary is drawn for a database. Often it includes things that are not environment agnostic. We don't have the web config, we don't have that nice abstraction. We have things that are messy, that are bundled in. We have cross-database dependencies. We have linked server definitions. If you're really unlucky, we have things like we have logins that should be environment specific but are not. So we've got a messy boundary there, and that's one of the problems in part of that story in moving into that continuous delivery world that we'll want to inhabit. But the other part that's interesting, I think, as well, is that test means something different in the data space, because you need data to test, and you often can't just sort of mock up a few artifacts in order to create that test. You need something a bit richer to provide that thing that's meaningful to the business. So we've got that challenge as well. But yeah, absolutely, continuous delivery for me is the feedback loop. It is addressing those challenges, finding ways of working around them, finding ways of abstracting those complexities for the particular concern, for the data tier in this case. But in order to satisfy the data Farley requirements, getting as close as you can to Farley world, where you've got the the releasable artifact that's built once. We can't quite get there, but we can get pretty close. Don't give up just because it's a bit difficult to get there. And the same
I like the idea
test.
of Farley World as a Dave Farley continuous delivery theme park.
Gary, what are your views?
Yeah, so I mean, take a step back. I mean, everyone wants to strive for continuous delivery. I think it's kind of an industry standard now that everyone wants to work towards. But even taking it back to first principles and going back to CI initially, I've worked in a couple of companies now where there wasn't even CI, so you didn't even know if what was in source control was even going to build. First day on the job that I've just started, checking out from source control, and the build doesn't work in my machine because some of the requirements aren't met. Implementing something like continuous integration as a first step on what I would regard as a journey to continuous delivery is you need to make that step. You need to have it to a point where what's in source control, it's known what it is, it's known how to build it, and then it's known how to deliver it and how to deploy it. So yeah, for me, it's very much a journey that you need to start on. And as we discussed today already, don't be afraid of it, but pick off the chunks that you can do and just build your way towards that enviable goal of having something you can deploy at will when you need to onto multiple environments.
Fantastic. Good stuff. And Liam?
So firstly, some of you are probably still thinking, why I'm still on this stage.
We tried to get him off, but he wasn't.
Yeah, I know. I'm just sitting here all the time. I was a building release engineer for like 5 years at a .NET shop, so I'm very passionate about a lot of things in this area. The two things that I would say about continuous delivery is a lot of this stuff is delivery, is your pipeline, is please package your things, please semantically version your things, no date versioning please, no zip packages or deploying from Git. Test your stuff, it's enough said, but really the delivery part, I can sit here and spout all day. You know how to deliver your code. You know that you are delivering your code, at least I hope so. The scary bit for most people is the continuous bit. That's the bit. Okay, I can deliver my code. I can deliver it. Hopefully, once a week or once every 3 months. I can deliver my code at some point in the future. But the continuous bit is where it gets where it gets people nervous. This is where the part of monitoring your stuff, testing your stuff, continuously testing your stuff. Is really quite vital. But one thing I've said before is also don't get bogged down in, we will say you need to have, decent performance test, regression test, unit tests, everything else. If you don't have that, it's not a blocker for you for this. It really isn't. Because you're deploying now and you don't have that stuff now. So your total risk might be greater because you're deploying more often, but actually in reality that risk is the same if you deploy in 3 months time or you deploy tomorrow. It's just some of it's your perception and your organisation's perception. Just as long as you're chipping away at that, chipping away at your tests, chipping away at your overall pipeline, you will eventually get there.
Perfect. All right, brilliant stuff. And good use of the word to segue me into the next kind of scene I want to set. So as we went down through the panel there, we heard a lot of these concepts. We heard about packaging, we heard about source control, we've heard about testing, we mentioned the word release, we mentioned deployment, and if we go back into Farley world, which sounds like an average theme park at the moment.
But the rights never sold.
Yeah. How did you get out? This is going to last all afternoon. What I'm really interested is there's a lot of concepts, there's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of moving parts. So, you know, we're talking in Follywood about this concept of a pipeline that Ian just mentioned. So I'm quite interested in what's your view of a pipeline. What does a good pipeline look like? What are some of the things that make that happen, and how do you kind of make that effective? So we'll start with Liam and work backwards.
Okay, so what I see as a standard pipeline is you have version control, you know, a good one. Wars aside, you have a server, a continuous integration server. I hate that term, but a server that builds your stuff, packages your stuff into an actual package. No zip files, no, you know, deploy to a directory and rsync that, whatever it is, an actual package with metadata. Then you have tests. You run those. You know, you deploy that to an environment. You run tests against that environment. That's your, I mean, QA or UAT or whatever it is, performance environments. If you have those, you run as many tests as you possibly can. You know, your pipeline may be very slow. That's a fantastic problem to have. So I often take the idea that the kind of metaphor that I want to take an artifact that's this big and I want to throw it at the entire of AWS and have it sit and have it, you know, cause a fire in AWS's data center and then give me back a nice green package at the end. Do that, deploy it to another environment, run some more tests, deploy it to another environment, run some more tests. There's a kind of a grey area towards the end. So in the kind of the feedback loop of this pipeline is a kind of grey area between what is a test and what is monitoring. We can have that discussion at length. But you know, you have this, and you have all of that stuff in the pipeline is also an artifact. So all of the logs of your pipeline, your test results, the places you deployed it to, when you deployed it, everything else is a nice artifact that can live in your artifact repository with your binary. That makes auditors very happy indeed. So that, you know, that's kind of feeds back then into your future runs, because you can do clever things then, like saying, okay, my pipeline failed because of this, run it again in this other scenario.
Good. So Gary, a few passionate words there around, you know, don't use zip files. Obviously, you know, we've got some views on what makes a good artifact, a good package. Can you give us some background, elaborate a little bit on maybe some elements of the pipeline that you see being important, but also why did Chocolatey come about? Why was packaging not where it should have been?
Sure, I can try. I think what Liam described there is your fairly standard pipeline. What I would say is that don't expect that pipeline to work the first time you do it, right? It's not going to work like that. In an ideal world it would, but what you're going to have is that your build's going to fail. Your unit tests are going to fail. That's going to take you back to the beginning. And you're going to need to make a change to your source control to make it so that builds, make it so your unit tests work, make it so that your packaging works. Don't get downhearted when it doesn't work the first time. It's not going to work the first time. So just be mindful of that. In terms of Chocolatey from a package management point of view, simply put, on Windows, there wasn't one. You've got things like apt-get, and you've got Yum, and you've got various other things on kind of the competing platforms. But in terms of allowing the installation of the developer tools that we know and love, and the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis, the story is simple. You go out to the website, you find the download, you download it onto your machine, you click the next. In terms of everything that we're talking about today, that's not repeatable and maintainable. So the idea behind Chocolatey was to allow the bundling of those installations in a repeatable, maintainable way, and that's really where Chocolatey comes from. And it's a point today where you can script out the entire installation of a developer machine from the base OS, including all of your developer tools, right up to configuring individual parts of the OS as well. So it's definitely something you should look into if you haven't looked into it already. It will help, I believe, in your developer workflows. Thanks.
So we've heard about some good pipeline elements, but none of that plays to databases, right, Richard? This is all dreamy stuff, and then we've got a big lump of
Well, I was going to comment on the point about not expecting it to work straight away, because at Redgate we work with DBAs and people who are, I mean, there's a gentleman earlier made a comment about infrastructure as code being somewhere where Fortran, in the days of Fortran or perhaps assembler. I would say, you know, as far as database developers and continuous integration goes, you know, maybe we're in a different engine or something like that. It's a lot of their understanding is very limited and is quite used as a scary new world. So communicating that idea that it is going to break first time you do it, and that also the happy path for continuous integration, in a way, is a failure experience. It's about seeing things fail. So it's about getting good logging, good error messages, and good and interesting surfacing of data that's going to help you take the next step, because it is very much a progressive matter. But yeah, continuous integration absolutely does and must apply for databases. It's whether you use it with with Redgate or whether you use SSDT, or there's some way that you can get your database into source control. I mean, it's one of my contentions that if you want to see a business system go wrong, the easiest way is probably to mess with the static reference data, or to lose a referential integrity in your database. It's probably easier to make things go wrong that way than by abusing your C# code that runs a service. So that stuff's nicely tested. That stuff's protected in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of nice design patterns and unit tests, integration tests. Is your static data really being managed as it makes a progression through the environments, and is your database refactoring really being protected? And remember that we hear a lot about. Matt Skelton did an interesting blog post recently about the hidden value of the monolith, and I've heard a few comments today about people breaking down monoliths. Fine, okay, that's no one likes monoliths, but are you sure you know what you're looking at? Are you sure you're looking at a monolith and not something that's actually protecting the integrity of your business's data model? So, if you've got a data model, a business model that says, well, a customer can have several accounts, but each account only has one base currency, and that's protected by a foreign key constraint, are you sure that you're still protecting it just as much and just as certainly when you break down that monolith? Trivial example, I know, but if you're not taking your refactorings of your data tier through a CI process, I would say you're exposing to your business to a level of risk that you wouldn't dream of doing when it comes to application code. So I'd say it's in its infancy, but it's not as critical as any other system component.
Okay, and there's a lot of
one of
pieces
those in the future.
So there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, and clearly just to get one of these pipeline set up, there are some tooling, but it's all about the tools, right, James? So we just bring the tools to the process, and then we have continuous delivery. Are there other things that we might need to do as an organisation to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I think it's very much worth mentioning that doing continuous integration and having a continuous integration server are two entirely different things. So just having a continuous integration server that builds on check-in and runs a unit test or whatever is not the same as actually doing the behaviour of continuous integration. Continuous integration involves responding and doing things when your build feedback tells you to do it. It's a way of working as much as a tool. So sort of don't check in on a broken build and that sort of thing. You'd be amazed how often we just see the rules of continuous integration, say rules of continuous, but the good practices of continuous integration just going to waste. There's that sort of making sure that your continuous integration system is giving you relevant feedback. And detailing too much is just creating a system of continuous investigation, where you're forever looking through your continuous integration system to find out what on earth has gone wrong. Oh, actually, it's just something really trivial and it doesn't really matter, or your environments are out of sync, or something like this. So there are behaviours that you have to adopt. There's also the whole team structure. If you've got everything working through your CI system, so the way that you rebuild your environments, etc., and so forth, then suddenly you're looking at possibly other people who aren't used to doing continuous integration, such as infrastructure people, now suddenly starting to adopt this behaviour of continuous integration. CI for your infrastructure as code, I mean, that's a fairly new world. Going out to those infrastructure guys and trying to teach them the ways of of the behaviours of continuous integration. So it's not just a subtle change in the way you work. It's a rather large departure for some people. And going back to the question about what does a good continuous delivery pipeline look like, for me, it looks like a series of rectangles, and if they're all looking green, then you're good enough to deploy to production. For me, that's what a good continuous delivery pipeline looks like. Simple as that. If those boxes are green, it's telling me this is good enough. And if it says that it isn't good enough, then you need to go back and make sure you're building that quality in.
I think you touched on the culture aspect, the big C word, and I think that's a huge part of it. The fact that it's the integration part of it is you should also be expected to be integrating with components that you may not own, and I've seen scenarios again and again and again where you will build your component and they'll be happy and all's green and everything's fantastic, but the result of that is you've broken someone else's. You've broken someone else's pipeline. Now, unless the culture is widespread in your organisation and you have hug-ups and you're delighting your customers, then you're going to create animosity and you're going to be pointing guns at each other very quickly. So you need a positive culture where everyone is embracing this model to realise that actually you've broken something. What you've not done is you've actually shown them something. You've shown them a problem. You haven't ruined their day.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. It's a learning curve. You're continuously learning as well.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with, or one of the problems, possibly the advantages of continuous delivery and trying to adopt this continuous delivery pipeline approach, is that it enforces or forces you down this route of optimizing and automating until you get right the way down to the very, very bottom, which is your infrastructure as code and all of the rest of it. So with a continuous delivery system, you might find that you're breaking, your code is breaking because of an environment issue. And the temptation is to just go, oh God, it's just an environment issue, I'll just carry on checking my stuff in. But that's not solving the problem, that's not making working software. There is a problem there, you've got to down tools and you've got to work out why your environments are so untrustworthy.
Okay, so before we kind of start to open up to questions from you guys, I'm sure you've got lots of thoughts building. When we talked about the continuous delivery approach, we talked about the pipeline. We had quite an interesting question raised earlier that looks at the concept of having multiple pipelines. You know, one for possibly in-house and one for third-party applications, split in different ways. What's the thought? Is this all about just having one pipeline, everything working in the same way, you know, the Highlander approach, or is there room in organisations to have pipelines working with the same principles but doing different